I'm Benjamin Hall, and I'm searching for heroes. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for joining me again today. And I think we've had a really good number of guests over the last few weeks, and I'm really pleased to say that we've got another great one today. My guest is First Lady Kathryn Burgum. She's the First Lady of North Dakota, and she's someone who's got an incredible story, and a story of hope and resilience and community. And that is because the First Lady, Kathryn, was an alcoholic for many years. She struggled with addiction. She's been quite open about how difficult that was and how at times she was suicidal and the struggle she went to get through it. Well, she has now not had a drink in many, many years, and she has set up a incredible program called Recovery Reinvented in North Dakota. And it is about helping other people talk to each other if they have this problem, about finding a way through, about hope, and also looking at the wider problem of how addiction must be seen as a disease. But today's conversation, she's really honest and open about her own experiences and also sends out a real message of hope. So wonderful guest on today. And again, I'm just thank you that you are joining us. And here's this week's episode.
First Lady, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm both so grateful that you're here as a guest, not only because of the work you've done, but about your own story. So thank you so much for joining me today.
I am so grateful to have had the opportunity to join you, that you reached out to me to be on your podcast. And I'm so impressed and inspired by what you're doing with your podcast.
Well, thank you very much. I wondered if we might start, first of all, talking in a more broader picture about being First Lady, because you have so many, I understand your husband has so many policies, he knows what he's doing, but how, as a First Lady, do you find your niche? Did you realize that, Recovery Reinvented, getting into this angle, that's where you wanted to go? How did you make that decision?
Well, first of all, on the subject of First Lady, let me tell you, it was never on my radar to be First Lady. So I often describe myself as the accidental First Lady because, he came home one day. I mean, after being in the tech world and the business world, both of us, I have an MBA in human resources, a career in marketing and human resources. And he came home one day and said, I think I'd like to, run for governor. And I was like, no, we have a great life, I was like envisioning, but it was crazy because what I thought was going to be a kind of a really challenging role for me has turned into something I never could have believed would happen to me and the opportunity that I have to help other people. So we started I started as First Lady, and one of the first things you do is figure out what your platform's going to be or what your cause is. And for 20 years, I struggled with the disease of addiction. I didn't reach out for help because of the stigma and the shame. And then I had 15 years of recovery when I became First Lady, and I never talked about it. Like, I had known people for 10 years who had no idea I was in recovery. And I didn't talk about my recovery because of the shame and stigma. So the first interview I did with a reporter, he asked me, what will you be focusing on? And I said, I'm going to focus on eliminating the shame and stigma of addiction. He said, well, that's really an interesting topic. Why would you choose that? And I just said, because it affects me personally. And that I had been in recovery from addiction for 15 years at that point. And the minute all of that rolled out from my tongue, I felt 100-pound weight lifted off my shoulders. And so then from there, it was just game on, walking through a lot more doors and, tons of opportunity to focus on eliminating shame and stigma.
Where does that sort of shame and stigma come from? Because, you would expect people who have gotten through something to come out the other side being so proud of what they've gone through. But I think the opposite is true, perhaps, when it comes to addiction.
Yes. Well, there's just so much stigma around the disease of addiction. And it's partly related to the negative consequences of, the criminal justice system, things that happen and what you see of people, that are homeless, or they've got mental health, usually mental health and addiction issues. And there's not enough talk about recovery. You don't see the faces and voices of recovery, of the people that have, that are living, in recovery, having gotten through that. And so, the big part of that stigma is related to that. And, at one point I gave a talk, and the head of the CDC was there, and I had been on their website looking for information for what do they do related to the disease of addiction. And there was a whole section on how to eliminate the stigma of HIV, but nothing about the stigma of addiction. And so during my talk, I hadn't told this guy that I was going to, but I just basically said, hey, you have the opportunity all you have to do is substitute the word HIV with addiction, and, you can make a lot of progress. So that, that is why, because there aren't enough people focusing on the recovery side. And the other thing is, there's a lot of money raised for a lot of diseases that affect a lot less people. But it's really hard to get the billions of dollars raised for research around the disease of addiction because of the stigma. So, and then, then we just accept things like, more people die of alcoholism every year. We just accept that, and so, so there's there's just, it's a challenge, but that's, my goal is to help people become more faces and voices of recovery and just talk about it. Talking is the easiest, fastest, cheapest way to eliminate stigma. Just talk about any other normal disease. But one other thing, I'm sorry, I'll just say one other thing, is that there's in the American Medical Society said that addiction was a disease way back in the 50s, that it's a brain disease. But for some reason, there's this other divergent path of, substance use disorder and, things like that. And I think that the acceptance of the disease of addiction as a disease, especially in the healthcare community and the hospital systems, et cetera, would go a long way to eliminating stigma, because that's what happened with HIV. It was diagnosed as a disease, accepted by the, American, like the healthcare system. And, it took a lot less of the punch out of stigma.
I suppose it's interesting to think of when you classify it as a disease, does that, because some people would say that addiction is perhaps because of bad parenting, or because you didn't have, socioeconomic background, or that some people didn't have enough help in their communities, etc. But would you differentiate it and say it's actually something far more biological than that?
Oh, yes, absolutely. It's a brain disease. It has to do with dopamine being released. It's the same thing with, drugs and opioids, et cetera. There's a reward system in the brain related to, this biological process happens. And, the more you do, the more reward you get, the more you do, the more you need, that sort of thing. But, thank goodness there are actually some, on the horizon, especially related to opioids. There's some, medications coming out now that take away pain, but they don't have that reward system in the brain that tells you the only thing that's the most important thing to you in your life is the drug, or alcohol, more important than your kids and a job and a safe place to live and all that. It's because of what happens in your brain. And that's why it is a brain disease. It's not a choice or a moral failing.
So why do you think addiction has not been classified as a disease when so many other things are? Why is addiction being left behind?
Well, I think it is classified as a disease in a lot of areas, and I think it's the breakdown of substance use disorder. I think substance use disorder came out as a way to classify someone in the insurance industry, and it's so I think that there. That's one of the areas where I would like to play a bigger role, related to focusing on this disease situation. Like, the National Institutes of Health, they focus on it as a disease, so I it's a good question in terms of, but I also believe it has to start at the highest levels and sort of, especially in the medical world, in the healthcare world, the stigma related to the disease of addiction in healthcare. There's no wing at the Mayo Clinic that's the the John Lee disease of addiction wing. Anything related to addiction is in a basement in the corner on the far reaches of campus. So that just says, oh yeah, well, there's all kinds of stigma. And so, again, I think also from a philanthropy standpoint and ability to raise money to focus on this topic can help eliminate a lot more stigma as well.
And you've had your own personal experience as well. So you understand exactly, what it's like. And I know that you've spoken in the past about that one first drink that set you on your way. You've talked about it almost triggering something. I mean, you almost felt like this immediate pull towards it. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Oh, yeah. Well, I started drinking when I was in high school, and I was a blackout drinker. I had my first blackout in high school. And so for me, that continued over 20 years of, struggling with things like, having the, desire to go work out and be with friends and whatever, to ending up, home alone drinking and suicidal really at the end of my drinking, because I had untreated depression as well. When I was in high school, I was popular. I had a lot of friends. I was involved in a lot of activities. I was athletic and, did all these things. But then there were these days when I didn't want to get out of bed and go to school. And I didn't really understand why, and now I know it's anxiety and depression. But, in my family, I come from a very Scandinavian family, and, we're basically Vikings, and we didn't sit around the dinner table talking about, our problems and our feelings. You just got back at it and, got it done. And so when I took my first drink in high school, I could be who I wanted to be. I probably had social anxiety. I'm more of an introvert. I could do what I wanted to do. I didn't care. I thought it was nirvana, until I had my first blackout, and then, struggled for the next 20 years.
When did you first realize that you were addicted to drinking? I mean, how many years did it take before you realized that there was a problem?
Well, I knew in college that there was a problem because I just didn't drink like everybody else did. There was no stopping once I started. And so that's really how I knew. But I also just hung around a lot of people. I was in college, everybody partied, but my highest priority, I didn't go to events that didn't have alcohol, like my nieces and nephews, that 1-year-old birthdays. I was like, is there going to be wine there for dinner? So, it was just a top priority for me. And now being in recovery for all these years, I realize, it's not normal to, have that be your highest priority, that everything is focused on alcohol, all your activities. And also that, drinking and driving was just like a normal thing. People who are responsible and think about not responsible, whose brain doesn't work like mine, they're like, oh, I'm going to have a glass of wine tonight. I'm not drinking, and people actually make those choices. And to me, back then there just wasn't a choice. And that resulted in, I did get a DUI, at one point. So anyway, luckily I didn't have a lot of car accidents and stuff like that. And luckily I, didn't kill anybody on the road, because that certainly happens to a lot of people.
So I suppose that's the first step to sort of overcoming it, is to, would you say, realize that you have an addiction? And then there's another big, brave step to saying, now I need to go and sort it out, because that takes a lot of bravery and courage as well.
Absolutely. Yes. I knew for a long time, but again, the stigma, was like, what am I going to, and I come from a long line of hard drinkers, and so I, what happened to me in the end is, really what I said was that I had, I was having suicidal thoughts when I drank, but when I was sober, I didn't want to die. And so that I was terrified of that. And so one day I was out walking, and I didn't have a lot of faith, but I knew, raised in the Catholic Church and stuff, and I knew there was, something bigger than me and whatever. And so I just basically said, I don't know if anybody's out there, but I need help. And I've been sober since I uttered those words. And so that was like, because I had tried to get sober. Like I had a period of 8 years where I was just relapsing on and off. I'd go 3 months and but I would try all these things on my own. And it just didn't work until I had this divine intervention, which really put me on the path.
That's so interesting, because it wasn't for all of the, you went and you spoke to people and you went through, a different sort of attempts, but it was only from inside you. It was when you realized it that you managed to stop. And I suppose, what does that say, first of all, about the programs that are out there? Because they clearly didn't work. It was you who made it work.
I think the programs do work, but I think people have to be completely willing to do like whatever it will take. And I think that, as long as there's that little bit in your brain that says, well, maybe, like I haven't lost a bunch of jobs and I haven't been homeless and so I'm really not the same as these other people. I'm better than, but when you become completely willing to do what these programs say, to be with the people that are in recovery who say, here's what worked for me, this is what I suggest, when you are at that point where you will do anything to stay alive and have that in your life, then I think that's when you're really open to being a part of the success of so many different types of recovery.
More of our conversation right after this. I wonder where that sort of resilience comes from, because, there are many people who are alcoholics their whole lives who can't get off it. And if only we could pinpoint what it is that gave people resilience to say enough's enough, or how we could teach that to people, or how we could impart that. I mean, perhaps this is what Recovery Reinvented is about. Maybe it's about giving people the knowledge to make that step. I mean, I'm fascinated with where that resilience comes from and who has it and who doesn't have it.
And that's just such a good point, because being resilient and resiliency is just is clearly so important. And I think for me, as much as I didn't like the side of my and still the side of me that's Scandinavian, it's like we don't hug for longer than like 1 second. And, we're, if you're around like Italians or whatever, you're like, oh, I can't do this, and so, it's like as much as but there's the side for me that was about resiliency and, that it was like getting the job done and doing it right. And, and nothing was too big of a problem, even my addiction and recovery, it was just like the ability to keep going after relapsing, so I think in me, it was that, but I also think that it's about hope. If you still have hope in your life, then you just don't want to give up, like if you believe there's one tiny bit of opportunity, that you just want to keep going. It's really hard though, when this brain disease happens, especially now with like synthetic meth and synthetic fentanyl, what that does in terms of changing the brain and the reward system is much stronger than any drugs that have ever been out there. And that's why people will freeze to death. They will be homeless. They will, commit crime. You just do not have the intervention opportunity to, these people, unless people are incarcerated, that's the opportunity you have. They won't raise their hands, whereas other, there's more opportunities because on other types of drugs. But, that's a whole separate, channel to go down related to what I believe on what we need to do to help more people, which would be in the criminal justice system.
Yeah, because that's the big question is, should you protect people from criminal charges if they're addicts? If you commit a crime while you are an addict, should you serve as much time as if you weren't an addict? And that's a really tricky, criminal perspective.
Right. Well, I do believe it's important to create opportunities for people to get help and get treatment. But, oftentimes people are in jail before they actually have their trial or they're in front of the judge. That opportunity might be the only chance you have really to save that person's life, because they get sober and they, do you know Sam Quinones, who wrote the book Dreamland?
No.
Incredible journalist. He lives in he was in LA for a long time, but he was, undercover with gangs in Mexico. So he knows a lot about the Mexican drug trade and cartels. And he wrote a great article that was in the Atlantic magazine. And it was all about that, we have to change the purpose of our criminal justice systems, become more of recovery opportunities, because that could be the only opportunity you have. And it's so true, because people just sit there for hours and hours, every day. When early in my recovery, and even, and since I've been First Lady, I do recovery meetings in jails. And very funny story, I had to fill out this, application to be able to go into the jail. And, it's like, have you had a felony? Have you had a misdemeanor? And anyway, have to check some of those boxes, but they still, which was great. So anyway, but having, if there's some of the money that's, in the criminal justice system can be diverted to when people are in jails, that would be incredible. But then there's also, in North Dakota, we have this really wonderful program called the Peer Support Specialists. There's such a big gap for when people get out of the criminal justice system and try to go back to their lives. And in North Dakota, 50% of our state is a rural state. We've got a bunch of wonderful little towns and communities, across our state. And every one of them has a church and a bar, and the church could use more business, and the bar has plenty of business. But those people that are in the churches are oftentimes wanting to help other people. But the point I'm getting to is we have 1,000 people trained in our state as peer support specialists, and these people have lived experience with the disease of addiction and mental health issues. And most of them are felons, and they can't get jobs. So we've created this role where you get certified, insurance reimburses. We have a program where there's a coordinator of these peer support specialists. That's a compensated position. I mean, it's really a career path for people who might not ever, have the opportunity. But what they do is help people get back on their feet. They help them find a job, the social determinants of health. And so, when you have someone helping you along like that, and you're automatically part of a community, then we have higher success rates in terms of making sure people aren't going back into the criminal justice system.
And I think community is just such an important word for any of the sort of getting over hardships, anything difficult. Community is there. But listening to what you were saying earlier, I suppose, you could get sober, but you don't want to go, if you just go back into the same group who are drinking, that's almost impossible to stop it yourself. I mean, would you say that to a certain degree, you just need to cut off those people around you who are drinking it? And that's very hard, particularly in a rural state. You can't go back to your small village or small town and just leave behind the people who are drinking. So that must be a really difficult stage for people.
You hit the nail on the head. You're so right. And I'm so, it's so cool that you focus on community as part of your podcast, because really that is true, it's much more difficult to take people out of their communities, and where their families are, and some of the places where their homes are, but you're right. If they don't have a community available to them, or if they're not connected, and when they leave treatment or they leave the criminal justice system, it's much, much harder. If they already have that community that they're a part of, when they come out of, like I said, the peer support specialist community, and, that's a whole recovery community. If they're able to do that, it's much, much easier to be integrated back into that community. But communities need to create opportunities. They need to have recovery community organizations. There are lots of different ways that communities can create more opportunity. Like there's so many towns too that have, their businesses are closing, and their shops are closing, and there's this great group in Vermont they have this treatment center called Jenna's Promise, and this family's daughter died of an overdose, but they have gone into this small community in their town, and they have like a sober living facility and treatment center. But then other people have started coffee shops in that area, and a little bookstore, and a little, and so they're creating this community and bringing back to, sort of dilapidated parts of a city, and making it more of a community. And so those are the other things that are, important. But community is really important, and meeting people where they are is really important.
I wonder if you take a broad look at it, and you look at society at the moment, and I don't know if this example use children who are on their phones too much, family values maybe not as strong as they once were. Do you think that that's leading perhaps to a less of the strong community, that perhaps in some cases we're forgetting the things that bind us together? And can that lead to addiction?
Oh, yeah, I do, especially for young people. I agree. It is so different now than it used to be. Kids would go outside and play, and around the neighborhood, and, that's, but, and then also so what happens on social media, to young people and, the bullying or the comparing to others and unachievable levels of, appearance or whatever it is that, suicide rates among young girls are just so much higher because of social media. So I think social media can really have create some real dysfunction and issues with mental health. And so I don't know what the solution is to that. I mean, I know, the TikTok situation, I don't know. I hope that we end up, because everything always seems to come full circle, and at some point people are like, okay, we do need, because, there are the people talking about how, just being alone is like, is it not a disease, but, it can just be really an awful thing for people and feeling alone. And, and so I don't know what the solution is. I don't know who's doing the best
community work. I think community, rebuilding community is what hopefully can prevent so many of these things. And I just think that's a message that has to be sent out. I mean, and then what is the message to families to try and prevent their children from, trying drugs, fentanyl, or drinking too much? What would you say to a family, who's got young children who are not at drinking age yet or taking drugs yet? Like, how should they be preparing, for the futures, for preventing anything like that happening?
Well, I think it's really important to talk about it. Like in North Dakota, we have this really cool approach to that kids learning about drugs and alcohol, and it starts in grade school. It starts by, parents talking about, mommy takes this for my health, this pill or whatever, and then you take these vitamins, which, helps you grow big and strong. And, it's like, and then but talking about it's really important. And starting from a young age, talking about how bad drugs are for your brain, like from in grade school. And, because all the research shows, which you probably know, that, trying drugs and alcohol before, the age of 15, gives you 5 times more likely to, your brain doesn't stop developing.
Still developing, yeah.
Yeah. So having that and then also, the school systems and in communities, that it's got to start at a young age, and it, you have to talk about the detrimental and focus on the positive things that you can do with your life and that sort of thing. But I also wanted to say that, one of the things we did in North Dakota is we had a program called Youth Ending Stigma, and we gave $1,000 to each school across our state that came up with a program for how they could focus on behavioral health, mental health, and addiction in their school system and help more kids, whether it was developing a website or it was having like a podcast or a once a month opportunity for people to get together. It just a lot of different things that they did to create more opportunities for more people, young people, to reach out to other people if they were struggling, or to get help, or just make it less of a stigmatized situation. So, again, the bottom line is just so more people will reach out for help. And so that was a very successful program. From 7th grade to seniors, we had tons of schools across our state using that money. So it was really great.
Yeah. Talk to children, let them know, early on, let them know how bad it can be, but also paint an amazing picture of what life is like without it and trying to build that. So you've got two sides of that working hand in hand. Well, what would your message then, or what would you say to a family who sees someone in their family has become addicted? That's so difficult. What should the approach be, without wanting to scare them away, but wanting them to get help? Like, how do you make that first move to say, I think you need help, or here's what we can do?
Right, right. It's, it really is about having conversations that are judge free, like, hey, I'm worried about you. I'm here for you. Let me know I can help. Oftentimes, building recovery friendly workplaces is a really important thing to be doing these days too, because, 80, of the millions of people that are affected by the disease of addiction, 80% of them are employed full or part time. So if you don't think it's in your workplace, it is. And so, to be able to, so lots of times, these companies are asking, what can our managers do? How can they, it's the same thing. It's just approaching people with a caring, attitude. Like, I'm just worried about you, if there's anything I can do to help. And then knowing what those resources are, like what's available in your community, if you know somebody's been struggling, usually you have some idea of how to get, you're doing that ahead of time, but it's just mostly being so non-judgmental. And, I heard the story of this guy who his daughter struggled for years with addiction, and he just couldn't enable her, but he didn't want to completely say, I just can't see you anymore. So he would say, you're always invited for dinner on a Sunday night, and my door is always open. And she would come sometimes, and sometimes she wouldn't. And then finally, once she came, and I said, Dad, I really need help, and took her to, they went to treatment, and she's been sober for like 10 years. But it was just always leaving that door open.
Always open. Yeah.
I'm available to help. So.
And I suppose the other message has to be, because you hear so often about people who it takes them quite a few attempts to get off the drugs or the alcohol, is to say that, look, it doesn't matter how many times you've fallen off. It doesn't matter how many times, there's always hope again. And that's a tough one, I think, mentally, for people who don't do something or who fail at it.
Yes. That
probably becomes harder.
Yes. Not give the hope again has got to be attached to that resiliency, not giving up. Like I said, 8 years for me of, I just trying and trying, and then just for whatever, there was just always this hope. And so, I think resiliency is just such an important thing in society today, in communities, in schools, building those skills. And, one thing I do, well, in North Dakota, we've got these animals called bison. Across America, people call them buffalo, whatever, but buffalo are really like in Africa and other places like that. But, we have the American bison, and the bison are like the symbol of resiliency, because, in winter storms, they will stand with their back, they know what to do just innately to survive. And the symbol of courage and the symbol of resiliency. And oftentimes I'll send people a bison just to remind them that, they had the courage, or to try to have the courage to change their life or whatever, because sometimes it just takes, having that symbol or that idea or whatever, just put it on your, I don't know. When I say that because when my counselor, when I was in treatment, I had an addiction counselor, and she had camels that she would give out to everybody. And it was, it was basically like, because the camel, will, can stay dry for so long. And, it's a symbol kind of in the recovery world. And that I had that thing, and we took it with, I still have it. I bring it out sometimes when I'm giving speeches, and I talk about the camel. And so anyway, but I just love that about what you're talking about in your podcast, is it's because, resiliency is not just about surviving tough times, but it's about thriving despite them. And as you are the person who would know that the most, based on what you've been through in your experience.
Yeah. So, and I think you're spot on. And I think the one thing that I take from what we've talked about is hope. No matter how bad it is, hope, community, it doesn't matter how hard it can be. If everyone has that hope, it doesn't matter if you've fallen off. There's always hope if there's community around you, and you can just take one step forward. Just maybe maybe make that first step. And I don't know, is that first step when it comes to drinking, is that just don't drink for a day? Or is that not a step? Or is it leave where you are? I mean, how do you make that first step? What could that be?
Well, I think that the first step is just reaching out for help.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the first step, whether that's, it can be your pastor at church, it can be a friend, it can be a treatment center, it can be an addiction counselor, it can be at work, your manager, just having that, the courage to reach out for help, because even that, it's just like, there is a burden that gets kind of released from your shoulder, even if you're not sober, but you're trying to get there. I think reaching out for help is the first. I mean, because the other thing is, if you are seriously, addicted to alcohol and have that addiction, it's not good to try to detox on your own. Detoxing from alcohol can kill people. And so it's really can be medically, you need it. Some people need it. So I think just reaching out for help and then deciding from there, what needs to happen.
Yeah. I suppose that's, as we finish up, that would be the message to anyone listening, and not just for addiction necessarily, but mental health problems or
yes.
anything that's difficult, anything that you're going through. Maybe you put your finger on it totally. Reach out. Just the first step. Just say to someone, is that right? Just talk to someone. That would be your
yes.
message to anyone.
Absolutely. And see, if we eliminate the shame and the stigma, it's a lot easier to reach out for help. And whenever I talk, I give talks at the Chamber of Commerce to meet, a bunch of business people getting together. And I talk about how important it is to, talk about the disease of addiction, because it's the easiest, fastest, and the stigma, like how addiction, it's the easiest way to eliminate stigma, but how addiction has impacted you or your life. And then I also say, and if you are in recovery, if you have the courage to become a face and voice of recovery, that's really important, because that helps eliminate stigma. And then I say, I am a face, and I ask people to join me. And then I will say, hey, if you're willing, stand with me now and be a face and voice of recovery. And then you have these people, 50 people or whatever, in a meeting of 500 people stand up, with tears rolling down their face. I'm getting emotional talking about it. And then, they're colleagues, that people don't know. But, and then there's just like a standing ovation for everybody. Like everyone's like, wow, that's so powerful. But it is. And that's what Recovery Reinvented is about for us. The governor and I have been hosting this conference now for 8 years. The next one's coming up on October 30th. You can register now at recoveryreinvented.com. It's free. It's free all day long, hosted by the governor and I, because we have incredible sponsors. And it's online, or you can come in person. And we have people around the world who dial in for the day. We have treatment centers, groups of people. It's broadcast behind the prison walls here in North Dakota. And it's an all day long conference. It's about hope. It's about eliminating stigma, with people talking about how addiction has affected their lives. But we also give people the opportunity to stand and be a face and voice of recovery. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful day.
And you are the perfect example of what, if you can find that hope, if you can make that first step and you can ask for help, you can end up wherever you want. And you are just the prime example of that, because you've done it, you've gone through it. And anyone listening, reach out to someone. And if you're in North Dakota, October 30th, sign up, go. We know it's all going to help, because it's led by such incredible people. But First Lady, thank you so, so much for joining me today. It's been such a pleasure having you on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. And in the spirit of that, anyone can reach out to me through my social media, which people do, and I will help you. So don't be, have the courage today, and you can start changing your life today, and have the hope to keep going, and the hope that there is more to life than struggling with the disease of addiction. Because believe me, I never thought I would be where I am today in my life. And I'm here because I found recovery, because I didn't give up hope. So thank you again for having me on your podcast. I sure appreciate it. Best wishes to you.
Thank you so much, First Lady. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. You too. Take care.
We'll be back in a moment with Searching for Heroes.
Well, I think, again, it's another episode that reminds me that no matter what you are going through, whether it is injury, whether it is bad finances, whether it is families breaking down, whether it is addiction, there are some key steps that work time and time again. It is about resilience. It's about coming together. It's about talking to people and admitting that what you're going through is difficult, looking for that first step and doing it with the support. And that's exactly what Kathryn, First Lady, has laid out. So a great guest to have on. I'm really pleased that you guys have listened as well and that you continue to listen. And again, the message that we say time and time again, reach out to someone. If you know they're having a difficult time, just as the First Lady said today, just talk to them. Let them know the door is open and it will always be open. And it doesn't matter how long it takes. It doesn't matter how many times you might fall off. And I feel that personally, when times are really difficult in the hospital, when things are really bad, you pick yourself up the next day and you said, yep, I didn't do well yesterday, but I'm going to do better tomorrow. And you can keep doing that again and again and again, because that's how you get through difficult scenarios. And in the end, you will. And the First Lady is a prime example of that. So thanks very much for joining me today. And we'll speak to you next week.
Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcasts Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts. And Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.